The Manufacturing Edge, where ops leaders break barriers, drive growth, and redefine what's possible.
Welcome to today's episode of The Manufacturing Edge. I'm your host, Daniel Bobick, and I'm thrilled to dive into a strategically impactful topic around how to leverage network optimization as a driver for growth in manufacturing. Joining me today are two exceptional leaders from TBM, Brian Cromer, who's a managing director of global supply chain practice, and Dave Hicks, vice president of maintenance excellence practice. Both bring decades of hands-on operational experience and a wealth of insights into optimizing manufacturing networks. In this episode, we'll explore how network optimization can transform manufacturing operations from reducing inefficiencies and cutting costs to driving top-line growth. Whether you're aiming to expand market reach, accelerate speed to market, or enhance your competitive edge, this conversation promises to deliver valuable takeaways. Let's get started. So, Brian, just to kick it off to you, how would you define network optimization in a manufacturing context?
Wow, network optimization is a pretty broad topic. Let's start with looking at all the components that need to be incorporated into network optimization, and that will hone it on the manufacturing side up a little deeper. So when we talk about optimizing a network, you have to incorporate all the costs of your operation. That can include freight costs, tariff costs, uh, transit costs between different sites, between DCs. You have to take into consideration your inventory carrying costs, and ultimately you're trying to get the lowest total cost in order to serve the customer as best you can. Where in manufacturing, we tend to gloss over or not dig into deep enough is optimizing your assets. So when we think about internal to a plant, all the equipment are assets that are really the meat and potatoes of developing the product that ultimately is going to get sold to the customer. And if we don't take care of those assets and we don't strategically think about how to utilize the assets across our network, then we tend to leave a lot of opportunity and cost on the table.
Yeah, Brian, that's a great point. The whole internal optimization, because you and I have both seen many manufacturing operations you walk into and you look at the flow and you scratch your head and go, why in the world are you set up this way? And more times than not, what happens is that companies grow over time. And what they do when they acquire new equipment is they just put it in the first open spot. And they don't think through that whole optimization of flow and how do I create good flow internally?
That's exactly right. In the manufacturing world, where a lot of companies don't pay close enough attention is how do we optimize those assets? There's a lot of changeovers that take place. There's time incorporated with the changeovers. The sequence in which we schedule is a huge driver to that. So as we think about how to optimize the network, we need to think of it globally and holistically, as well as each individual component of the network being the distribution centers and or the manufacturing centers.
Yeah, I think Brian, you really nailed it when we started off and you said, "Well, network optimization, that's a broad topic," and that's the first question I always have when people talk about network optimization is, what are you trying to optimize to or for? So if you think about that, I can optimize my network in any number of ways. Maybe I want to have plants serve as centers of excellence, or maybe I want to have plants that are regionally located that produce all my catalog of SKUs, right? So you have to have some notion of manufacturing strategy and what it is you're trying to do. So when you start talking network optimization, it's not necessarily a thing that means the same thing to everybody. It's like, okay, first question is, what are we optimizing for?
That's a good point because depending on who is asking for the optimization and the request, you could have somebody maybe in finance that's 100% focused on lowest cost and trying to drive margin up. What they may not consider is the impact to the customer service and the customer experience. So if you talk to somebody on the sales side, Where cost is important and getting the right price is important, you have to balance that equally with making sure that we service the customer and provide the experience that they desire.
Yeah, and a lot of that service, if you think about it, there are a lot of industries where customers are going to call you up and say, "Hey, I want to order XYZ," and if you don't have that or if you can't supply that in their time frame, you have to think through all those things. I mean, I've worked with a lot of packaging companies that their product is generally very light. So for them to fill a semi truck with a bunch of light product and send it across the country is ridiculous, right? So that kind of drives one type of optimization.
That's correct. And if you think about a network with many DCs, many manufacturing sites, understanding your customer base and what products tend to go to what markets or what regions helps you to build that strategy of where do I need to produce what types of products. So where we're quick to say, well, it's going to be more expensive to ship it across the US, that may be the case, but if it's infrequent, it's a lower total cost than it is to have that manufactured at that point if there's a lengthy changeover and a lot of scrap that could be incurred because of it and they're just not used to that particular product. So there's many factors that need to be considered when you think about how do we serve the customer the best we can at the lowest cost possible, driving our profitability as high as we can for the business.
Do you have any examples? I mean, can you share any examples of folks that you've been working with recently and some of the questions through the decision making process to find out, are we optimized the way that we should, and decisions that they ended up making that and how that impacted the business? Is there anything that comes to mind?
Sure. So a couple of examples. One is a brick manufacturer to where every manufacturing site was thought to be equal and independent. Once we started looking across the total network of how do we service the end customers, it became obvious to us that strategically planning certain products and certain manufacturing sites and just distributing across the network saved millions of dollars instead of having every individual site be everything to everybody. Then, when we talk about internal to the walls, recently I was asked to look at where do we need to put a new line, and the business had already had an idea of where in the factory that line was going to be placed. Well, very quickly we realized that the flow through the facility was going to be very poor with the location they chose. So we took a step back and looked at the entire factory and looked at what would be the optimal way to flow, reducing transit times, changeover times. And at the end of the day, the answer was we need to pick up and reposition every piece of equipment inside of that factory. And it was the exact example of what David mentioned a minute ago. They had grown over the course of time and just picked and plopped in lines wherever they had space. And over that time, it became very inefficient.
Sure. So help me understand, what's the pay? How long was the payoff typically on something like that? Because it sounds to me like picking up a lot of equipment and completely rearranging everything so that there's better flow would be pretty expensive. How long does it typically take to, at what point does it make sense to start doing stuff, to start moving equipment like that?
Yeah, great question. So in this case, it was costly to be able to make that move. The payback turned out to be less than 2 years. And the way we were able to do that is to utilize resources better. We were able to optimize the flow of the material. We could drive down inventory. Our response to the customer improved. So it turned out that it was, a really easy sell to say, yes, we're going to incur the cost up front, but your payback's going to be significant and it won't take too terribly long to get there.
And if you balance that against the cost of, let's say we don't make those moves, then we're going to have to buy new equipments. We might have to install new lines. So the capital cost of doing that can be, can way overshadow the cost of rearranging some equipment.
Yeah, good. So switching gears to to the current state, I guess, of how's the role of network optimization evolved in response to supply chain disruptions and global economic changes? Brian, do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, sure. With the increased tariffs, a lot of companies are, we'll say, nervous about what the impact's going to be. Not only the cost of the tariffs, but potentially there could be disruption in the supply chain. So it tends to push people to start thinking a little bit different to where should I reshore, should I nearshore? So do I need to get my supply chain closer to me into regions that are less likely to have as large an impact as coming from the Asian market? So that's one consideration to view the cost of the product itself. Where a lot of companies, I think, failed in the beginning is to incorporate the total cost of what it really is to get product over. So your assumptions could be, I'm going to always have containers that are coming to me. Another consideration is if you have any kind of product that is defective or bad and you get into a situation of air freight, that air freight very quickly offsets the benefit for getting a low cost product somewhere else. So as we look at, you know, what is the best strategy, you got to look at things like tariffs, total cost, freight cost. But the other component is to look at potential disruptions. That could be politically driven, it could be regionally specific, where you're impacted by either a tornado or a hurricane. So there's a lot of considerations that need to be incorporated in making the decisions, and you got to take the time to really look at all the different options and alternatives before making the final call.
So, and maybe maybe going back maybe to the last to the last question, I maybe missed something. I know we talked a little bit about the payoff. Is there a way that you can kind of talk about maybe some of the dollar impact to that, if there's a way to kind of quantify that? I know the payback is in within a couple of years. Does that make sense to? And this is just me having a conversation here at this point, right? I mean, does it make sense to talk about what what the savings are in terms of millions of dollars?
Yeah, it's going to be dependent on the type of business, right? But typically in this case, to do a major layout is going to be uh, a couple of $1 million, $2 to $3 million. So if you think about a payback of less than 2 years, it's pretty substantial. And then the thing to understand is after I've paid that $3 million back over the 2 year period, now I get that savings that's going to be recurring year over year. So years 3, 4, 5, you're looking at, $1.5 million, $2 million, that straight profit to the bottom line, that's driving your costs down. So at the end of the day, it's all about having the strategy and the forethought to think a little longer term instead of just the near term.
Good, thank you. How does just talking about top line growth, some of the top line growth strategies? How does network optimization unlock opportunities for growth? We talked about cost and we talked about reduction in savings, but also let's talk about top line growth.
Yes, so the top line, you can develop some different strategies. Once you understand what your cost reduction is, what your total cost of the product is, then you can get strategic about going to specific regions, targeting specific customers. It makes you more competitive to where you can compete and start to take market share from the competition because you were able to drive the cost out of the business, making your costs lower. What you don't want to get into the habit of doing is thinking about, I'm going to do a cost plus to go after that new business. You need to understand the market. Where are the products really selling? What is the market capable to bear? And be able to price yourself to a position to where you're driving higher profit margins in specific targeted customers and or regions.
I think a big part of this whole thing is really customer service level and the ability, because many industries are very competitive, and if you don't service a customer, someone else will. So when you think about this whole optimization and keep in mind, how does that help me service my customer base?
That's correct.
So speaking of, Dave, I know that you work with an awful lot of companies and that you see a lot. Are there any specific industries where network optimization has had a major impact on scalability?
Well, the first two to come to mind, I talked earlier about packaging, and that seems to be an industry where people spend a lot of time thinking about the strategic importance of where do I locate and what do I do and what customers am I serving. The other one that comes to mind is really food and beverage. And most of that is really because you've got shelf life issues. So you have to think about how do I set this network up so that I'm able to service my customers, but I can do it in a time period that doesn't create spoilage in my product.
As a leader, and you're looking at this and you're listening to this podcast, what are some next steps, or what are some things that I should be thinking about and looking at in my organization uh, at this point when it comes to optimization?
I mean, I'll piggyback on something Brian was talking about. Too many times we're constrained by the past, right? So when you think about, Brian was talking about the flow inside of a plant, most people will say, okay, well, we got what we got. And so instead of allowing yourself to be constrained by that, you have to think beyond it and say, okay, really, if I'm going to start this all over, what's it going to look like? So, the old, why do you do this? Well, that's the way we've always done it. So you need to break free of that.
That's a very good point. And the other thing to consider in an optimization is it's not a one and done. The business changes, your customer base changes, it's ever morphing into something else. There's new products that come out. So, network optimization should really become standard practice to where you review it a minimum of one time a year to make sure that you're set up to service the customer the best that you possibly can, achieving the lowest cost that you can, and ultimately be as profitable as you can. So you can't just do it one time and walk away and say it's done. It could be as quick as 3 months down the road, 6 months down the road. There's a lot of changes in the market. There could be a lot of changes in cost structure. You could have tariff impacts. So you have to be nimble enough to review your network at a regular cadence to ensure that you're staying on top of it and thinking in the future strategically than just accepting, like Dave said, it is what it is. This is the way it's always been.
Yeah, I like that. I like that notion of an annual look because I think at the same time, an organization should be looking at their manufacturing strategy. And so that the network optimization and the manufacturing strategy go hand in hand. And so if you say, okay, we're going to do that every year, maybe you're using strategy deployment or some other tool. When you do that annual review, you can also say, okay, we need to look at our manufacturing strategy and our network optimization.
That's a very good point. And having those tools readily available to update and to review is a key component. We use demand segmentation, which is a process in which we are able to see the different types of product families, the distribution with the customer, what's the most profitable products that we have. So, by performing a demand segmentation frequently, that gives us the ability to review the overall business, look at the right strategies, determine the right stocking levels, and then it also helps to set manufacturing up to be successful as far as what products need to run on what asset and what frequency should they run and what level of inventory do I need to carry to make the manufacturing process efficient, but also being cautious not to drive my working capital up. So it's a really optimized way of thinking. We need to optimize productivity, reduce that cost, but I also need to optimize my inventory position, making sure that I can service my customer effectively, but keep my working capital down as low as possible. We use a tool called Simulate as well. That's a simulation tool that is easily updatable, and it incorporates all the different cost structures that go into your entire network to be able to give you a quick high level view and to point a direction of where you really need to focus.
I love the demand segmentation tool, Brian. I mean, I'm working now with a client that has a multi-million dollar production line, and its design is clearly set it up and run, right? Don't change over, don't have short runs. You want to have really long runs. And what's happened now from a market standpoint has shifted to where now they're having to change this line over frequently, and the amount of material waste is incredible. So, you have to think through those things, and all this stuff ties together and say, okay, look, if I'm going to service a market that's going to require a lot of changeovers, my equipment needs to be able to do that. So it's a great tool.
That's exactly right. Faster or bigger is not always better. So you got to make sure you have the right asset for the right type of product and what you're trying to service your customer with.
So I'm sitting here and I'm thinking to myself, if I own a company, or I'm a CEO of a company or COO of a company, and I'm assuming that you've heard from other folks, doing this before. People look at you and say, well, why didn't we do this earlier? Why didn't we optimize this earlier? What are some of the typical responses or answers to that, you think, that's in people that prevent companies, organizations, or CEOs from making a decision to optimize, to take the first step in this process?
Many companies get into the rut of this is the way it is and this is what we always have done. And they don't take a breath and sit back and say, you know what? Let's think outside of the box. Let's think of if we could start from scratch, what would that look like? So it's really clearing that mind and having the forethought to say, let's ignore the what if scenarios. Let's put together what we think the perfect uh, network would look like, and then determine, what is it going to take to get there, and let's develop the strategy. So a lot of times over acquisitions or market shifts, businesses just morph with the change. They don't sit back and think about the impact to the business until it's too late. And years later, the profitability declines. And then somebody says, wow, what are we doing? And how do we get our profitability back? And you got to take a step back and say, okay, it's time to look at the overall network.
Yeah. The old saying, Daniel, that you can't see the forest for the trees. That's a perfect example, right? So they're in it in the day to day and everything that's going on, and they're really not able to step back. I tell a lot of clients, look, when you hire somebody before they've been there 3 months, you need to go talk to them and ask them a lot of questions and ask them, what they see and that sort of thing, because they'll see it right away. They may not say anything, but they'll see it. And if you ask them, you'll get that feedback. After about 3 months, they're already part of the team, right? So they're enculturated to it. So you need to get them when they're really fresh.
That's right. We call that going rogue. So when you get into an environment after about 3 months, you become part of the norm of that environment that you're in. So it's critical, like Dave said, the fresh eyes are the way to go. And you got to encourage people to speak up and challenge the status quo.
It sounds like there's value in having a third party come and do this. Because speaking of fresh eyes, having an outside party come in and being able to do some of the analysis and speak truth, for lack of a better term, to organizations. Can you speak to the value of having a third party come in and help with in this process?
Oh, absolutely. It's as a third party, we're always unbiased. So we don't come in with any preconceived answer or notion. We come in to learn. We listen. So when somebody looks at TBM and says, well, you have all the answers. We don't have all the answers. We know how to get the answers. We know how to talk with the right people in the organization to be able to understand the problems, the issues. We work with them and take their knowledge and incorporate the whole group to drive the right decisions. So it's important to have somebody that's unbiased that can talk across the organization and understand all the different components inside of that organization to make it efficient, effective for everybody.
Yeah, and very often those outside eyes have a lot more experience in different industries and can bring that to bear, right? So if I think about, I mean, I should do this sometime. I should sit down and count the number of different factories I've been in my life. I've, been over 40 years in manufacturing, and I've seen a lot. And, you know, that's very helpful when you go into a new place. You can draw on those references, and you can see things differently than folks. If you've been working in the same place for 20 years, again, you don't have that kind of experience.
That's a very good point. It's if you think about a lot of companies, many employees have worked at the same place forever, so they don't know what better looks like. What we are able to bring to the table is we've seen the worst of the worst, and we've seen some of the best, and we've seen everything in between. So when somebody says, well, that's impossible, there's no way you can do that, we can with confidence say, you can do that. You can figure it out. We've seen it, we've helped do it. So don't say no. Let's just go forward.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, so parting words for you both, Dave, Brian. I've enjoyed the time together, and I think that this has been very insightful for our listeners. And I wanted to maybe just leave with asking for one piece of advice. If you could, for our listeners that are out there right now, if you had a kind of a parting piece of advice for those that are listening, what might that be?
I would say don't wait. Today is the day.
The best time to plant a tree was yesterday. The best plant is today. I guess the next second best time is today.
There you go. And I think going along with that, with what we already touched on, is the idea of don't allow yourself to be constrained by the past.
Good. Well, Dave, Brian, I appreciate the time. It's been fantastic. I really enjoyed the time together. Thanks for sharing your insight and your wisdom. And to all our listeners, we appreciate you taking the time to explore the power of network optimization with us. Don't forget to follow our company page on LinkedIn at TBM Consulting Group and now on Spotify.